Truth is, I sold my house. My brother-in-law, Kevin, said. My husband and I were shocked, stunned into silence. The person most shocked of all was my mother-in-law. Why? Why would you do such a thing? Weren't you supposed to come pick me up? My mother-in-law was visibly upset, confronting Kevin. Calm down. Kevin tried to pacify her and started to explain why he did it. My name is Sandra. I do remote work with my husband Robert. The peaceful work environment, where we could take breaks whenever we wanted, satisfied both of us. Then my mother-in-law came to live with us. We were financially stable, so we didn't have any complaints. But why aren't you two going out to work? My mother-in-law would look at us disapprovingly as she said this. I felt exhausted at her words, as if the same thing was starting all over again. When my mother-in-law first questioned us like this, we explained that we were working remotely. But aren't you just playing around? I've told Robert the same thing. Are you listening? When will you two start working properly? Aren't you thinking about your future life? My mother-in-law refused to understand our job. I'm so worried. I wonder if I made a mistake coming to this house. I should have gone to Kevin's house. She would often sigh and say this. The Kevin she mentioned is Robert's brother. He has married a wealthy woman named Carol, who he found somewhere, and now he seems to be living off her wealth. My mother-in-law wasn't informed about this. Kevin asked us not to tell her. Kevin's house is not a small one like this. It's very large. It's like a foreign castle. Well, I'm planning to move to Kevin's house eventually, which will become my house. My mother-in-law would say this, waiting for Kevin to come get her. We knew that the day would never come when Kevin and his wife would come to pick her up. That's because Robert once suggested to his brother, who his mother dotes on, that she could live with him. However, Kevin refused to live with his mother. So, we ended up living together. And even though we were called unemployed for doing remote work, we resigned ourselves to the fact that that's just how she is. But an incident occurred that made it impossible for us to continue tolerating it. Out of the blue, we got a call from Kevin. I'll be coming over this weekend. Without waiting for a response, he hung up. What do we do? That guy hasn't changed a bit. Robert and I were baffled, and overhearing our conversation, my mother-in-law leaned in, looking delighted. He's coming to pick me up! Please, help me prepare to move, she said, and then dragged Robert off to her room. Robert looked troubled. Mom, Kevin's not coming to pick you up. He probably called because something happened. But she snorted, clearly unconvinced. That can't be true. But he didn't say anything about picking you up on the phone, right? He just didn't say it, Robert. I'm so tired of this house. You're probably hoping to make me your housekeeper, but that's not going to happen. We couldn't understand why she was having such paranoid thoughts. Since she came to our house, she got up whenever she wanted, didn't do any housework, and lived off the pocket money we gave her. Well, we weren't going to force my mother-in-law to stay, so we did as she said, packed her bags, and waited for his brother to come. Over the weekend, my brother-in-law and his wife arrived at our place. As soon as they entered our home, they had suspiciously ingratiating expressions on their faces. I had a bad feeling. Just then, my mother-in-law emerged with sparkling eyes. You finally arrived! Listen here, Sandra is totally inept at house chores, so I have to do them. And Robert completely ignores me. Isn't that terrible? She said that with a victim-like expression, pushed past Robert, and welcomed her brother into our home. You guys, don't mistreat Mom. There's no way we're doing that. We're giving her an allowance, and she's eating whatever she likes. Plus, Sandra is handling the house chores, Robert said, with a complicated expression on his face, but his brother just looked suspicious. Robert has always been a bit clueless, probably treating Mom badly without even realizing. And it seems Sandra isn't the considerate type. That's right! Kevin really understands me. Hearing this conversation, Robert and I couldn't help but scowl. Despite this, we decided to entertain our guests, and led the couple to the living room. We all sat around the living room table, with Robert and me on one side and the couple on the other. Now, what are you sitting around for? Serve the tea! Huh? I thought you were going to make the tea, mother-in-law. What are you saying? Making an old woman work? You see, Kevin? Sandra is this kind of person. My mother-in-law even started fake crying at that point. I was so stunned at her behavior that I didn't even feel like retorting. Once I had served the tea, the couple became solemn. The truth is, we sold our house. Robert and I were surprised and shocked at Kevin's words. The one who took the biggest shock was my mother-in-law. Why would you do something like that? Didn't you come to pick me up? She asked, flustered, confronting Kevin. He tried to calm her down, saying, "Easy, easy," and then began to explain. We've been in debt, and though we could repay the debt by selling the house, we're broke and have nowhere to live. So we came to discuss if we could stay here. What? Debt? I was trying to start a business, but it didn't go well. Well, that happens, right? Kevin, unabashed, laughed while saying this. Robert and I sighed in exasperation. We only need to stay until we find a new house. Please, we have no one else to turn to. The couple bowed their heads together. I think our expressions must have been complicated, but if they had nowhere to live, we had no choice. We agreed to let the couple temporarily stay in our house. However, we made them promise to leave within a month. Kevin said, "Got it," and still laughing, went back to prepare to move their things. After they left, my mother-in-law sat silently, looking thoughtful. Robert and I assumed she was still in shock. The next day, the couple's stuff arrived right away. This much? Where should we put it all? We're in trouble. We might have to sell some of it, or rent a locker. While discussing this and moving Kevin's things, my mother-in-law dropped a bombshell on us. I've been thinking, won't we be more secure in the future if Kevin's here? So you freeloaders can leave, can't you? My husband and I were taken aback by my mother-in-law's abrupt statement. If you insist, I can tolerate Robert staying, but I don't need a wife who can't do anything. Get a divorce, then the space that Sandra was occupying can be used for all these packages. My mother-in-law made this demand eagerly, her eyes shining, and looked to my husband for agreement. What are you talking about? He reacted as he usually did, completely astounded. Then, my brother-in-law and his wife arrived. My mother-in-law greeted them with joy. Although I was still shaken by her previous words, my husband decided to ignore them for the moment and asked his brother to deal with the packages. There were more than I thought. Try to reduce the number, rent a locker, or sell some if you have to. When my husband said that, his brother glared at him and said, "What are you talking about? These are important packages. How could I sell them? And what if someone steals them from a locker? What if they get damaged? Are you going to take responsibility, bro?" My husband shook his head at his brother's selfish behavior. This is our house, you know. It's only natural that you should endure some inconvenience, right? If you don't like it, find a place to live, quickly, and leave. At that moment, my mother-in-law shouted, "What are you talking about? Didn't I just say, if you two are not happy with Kevin and the rest, you can leave. You're basically freeloaders. You're not needed in this house. Kevin is trying to start a business, and all you two do is loaf around the house doing so-called remote work. You're a nuisance." My mother-in-law said this as if it were her own house. My husband and I looked at each other in disbelief. My brother-in-law and his wife were surprised at my mother-in-law's words, but then they started to smirk. That might not be a bad idea. "Mom, that's a good idea. Yeah, it's a hassle to look for a place, so we could live here. So sell this house to us. Right, Carol? I feel uncomfortable with you two around, so it would be helpful if you sold this place to us. Plus, it seems like our mother-in-law is on our side, so sell this place to us." My husband and I were dumbfounded at their words. "What nonsense are you?" my husband began, but was interrupted by my mother-in-law, who gloated. "See? Both Kevin and Carol are saying the same thing. So what will you do, Robert? If you're going to divorce, you can stay here." My mother-in-law glared at me triumphantly. I braced myself to retaliate, but my husband spoke first. "Don't you just say whatever you want? Why does Sandra have to leave?" My husband was red in the face with anger, raising his voice. "Don't shout like that! It's better without a burden around, isn't it?" My mother-in-law retorted, but my husband responded in an exasperated tone. "You don't understand anything. This is Sandra's house." At my husband's words, my mother-in-law and brother-in-law, and his wife, gasped. My husband started speaking up to them, adding to the tension. "This is the house that Sandra bought for our life together." "What? What are you saying? Isn't it the husband's job to buy the house?" There's no such rule. Moreover, Sandra covers all of Mom's allowance and living expenses. Sandra said she'd take on that burden because your pension is minimal, and it would be difficult for you to have financial freedom with just that. Robert was glaring at his mother-in-law with an intense expression. Despite this, my mother-in-law seemed to disbelieve, looking at me and snickering in disbelief. Unbelievable! Sandra just plays on the computer all day. She doesn't even do housework seriously. Wasn't my allowance coming out of my pension? Otherwise, there's no way Sandra could afford to give me $500 a month. Moreover, my mother-in-law continued, Sandra is the one managing my pension, isn't she? You might have told Robert otherwise, but I'm sure you're dipping into my pension. She puffed up her chest and glared at me. I glared back, not to be outdone. It's true, I've succeeded as a business owner. You're lying. Divorce this lying wife already. You should live here with me and Kevin and Carol. Besides, there's no proof that Sandra is earning money. There is. Here it is. With that, I pulled out my paycheck and showed it to her. The sight of it left my mother-in-law and Kevin and his wife slack-jawed. We've not used any of Mom's pension since she moved in here. If Mom ever wanted to leave, Sandra has been managing it so she could live independently. But instead, Mom, you've been bossing Sandra around, interfering with her work. You're the problem. If you don't like Sandra, you should leave, right now. I don't believe any of this. We don't mind if you and Kevin temporarily stay, but some patience should be expected. We didn't want you two to live here in the first place. We only agreed because you begged us. Robert said this, glaring at Kevin and his wife. Kevin and his wife broke out in a cold sweat, not used to Robert raising his voice. Just kidding! But you sure are earning a lot, huh? I wish you could teach me some business tricks. Right, Carol? Yeah. While it's true we were worried about living with our sister-in-law, it seems like she's a good person after all. Kevin and his wife smiled at each other, but my mother-in-law was unyielding. Don't act so high and mighty. You're just a bum. Enough! Robert, you should leave too. You should go outside and see how harsh this world can be. My mother-in-law, filled with conviction, refused to listen to anything we said afterward. Robert and I sighed in disbelief, interrupting her with, well, if that's how you feel, we'll pack our things and move to a new house. You guys will be stuck with a mortgage, but if that's okay with you, don't come crying to us for help. If you insist, mother-in-law, we'll leave. Even with a pension, maintaining your lifestyle will be challenging. But I guess that can't be helped, can it? At our words, my mother-in-law turned beet red and yelled at us to get out. Wait! You can't be serious! We don't have to do that, do we? Yes. If you two are here, we're safe. Kevin and his wife tried to stop us, but my mother-in-law gave us a fierce look and said, Don't you dare talk back. Kevin, you're going to be a CEO, aren't you? I don't mind you using my pension, so just start a company and show us how successful you can become. I'll show you what happens when you defy us. My mother-in-law's words were filled with intensity. Hearing this, we decided it was best to no longer get involved with her or Kevin's family and left the house. Of course, the mortgage on the house remained, but we changed the ownership to Kevin's name. Some time had passed since then. While there was some residual dissatisfaction from that incident, having been freed from my mother-in-law's sarcasm, we had resumed our normal routine. Just when we were working from home in our new apartment, as usual, my mother-in-law called my husband, crying. Kevin has taken my pension and disappeared. He hasn't come back in a week. Carol and I are left alone in the house and we're in trouble. Please help us. She wept as she said this. After my husband calmed my mother-in-law, he asked why Kevin had gone missing. I gave all of my pension to Kevin for his startup, but he ended up spending it all on gambling. When I confronted him about it, he disappeared. She cried out desperately. Since my mother-in-law couldn't continue the conversation through her sobbing, the phone was handed to Carol. Could you please call us back? We can't live like this. Ever since Kevin failed his startup and sold the house we were living in, our parents have disowned us. My dad won't forgive us for selling that house. We haven't been able to reach either our dad or mom since... Carol pleaded with my husband. At the sight of them, my husband muttered, I knew it, in a disgusted tone. That's unfortunate, but don't involve us. We warned you when we left, didn't we? Even if you come crying to us, we won't help. You can report Kevin as missing to the police. It's none of our business. With that, he hung up. I was shocked, but my husband said, "They got what they deserved." And I agreed. After that, they called my husband's cell phone many times. When my husband, frustrated, answered the phone, Carol would cry about not knowing how to report Kevin as missing. We were surprised she didn't know and gave her advice to call the police. However, they still couldn't find Kevin. Just when we thought they might not find him, we heard that Kevin had been arrested for bank robbery in another state. Apparently, he did it to repay his debts. It seems it wasn't his first offense, and he would likely face actual jail time. Carol can't go back to her parents' home and is still living with my mother-in-law in that house. It's uncertain whether or not she will divorce Kevin. That's probably the least of her concerns right now. She registered with a temp agency and is struggling with her first job ever, but she's somehow making ends meet every day. As for my mother-in-law, Kevin took all of her pension, and now she has to repay his debt. She has also started working part-time to repay the debt. My husband and I expressed sympathy for my mother-in-law and sister-in-law's family, but we have made it clear that we have no intention of helping them, and we have cut off all communication. They must be tasting the harsh realities of life that my mother-in-law always talked about. Despite the changes since my mother-in-law moved in with us, my husband and I are glad that we have returned to our peaceful days.